Gartner, the analyst firm, has identified 7 technology disruptions that are going to impact sales in the next 5 years. So the entire sales profession, they are saying that sales leaders need to recognize, prioritize, and respond to these 7 disruptions over the next 5 years, or risk becoming obsolete or falling behind the competition. And the great thing about all 7 of these is that they are all based around AI. So I'm going to quickly run through the 7 and just list those off, but I do want to get kind of into a couple of the stats they drop on here in this article because some of these are crazy and really, really cool. So the 7 technologies are generative AI. So things like DALL-E 2, Jasper, Stable Diffusion. We'll be talking a lot about tools like that in a minute here. Something they call digital twin of the customer. So actually simulating elements of your customer's behavior and personality in order to better understand them. Augmented reality / virtual reality, machine customers, which was actually a really interesting one to me. So actually machines that will go do buying for you as a customer, as a consumer. Digital humans, which would be avatars that are simulated by artificial intelligence to interact with customers. Emotion AI, which is using AI to understand what emotions are actually impacting people, how they're feeling. And then multimodality, which was basically saying there's going to be multiple modes for sellers to log activities, and AI is going to layer over all that data to essentially assist and augment your sales operations. And so before we dive into these, there are a couple of really wild stats that they called out. So in the case of generative AI, which can produce everything from images, video, movies, what have you, and we've talked about it in the past, we're going to talk a lot about it today. Gartner predicts that by 2025, which is 3 years from now, 30% of outbound messages from large organizations will be synthetically generated. So almost a third of all messaging, all interactions, they believe will be AI powered in some way. Another crazy stat to me is that we're actually going to see by 2024, in their estimation, AI identification of emotions will influence roughly half of the online ads that buyers see. So you'll actually start seeing dynamic advertising and messaging based on the emotions that you respond to most. And also, I thought it was really interesting by 2025, 70% of all B2B seller buyer interactions are going to be recorded so that AI, machine learning, and NLP, natural language processing, can be layered over them to augment and impact sales operations. I know you had sent me a couple of those. What are your thoughts on that? Those to me are very, very realistic, but also just a shocking display of how far we've come, how fast.
Yeah, I read this post. I was doing a keynote actually at Marketing Profs B2B Forum last week, and I read this post the evening before I went on, and I actually had an AI and sales slide in the presentation. I was like, I feel like I need to go update the deck. I did not do it, but I actually infused a little bit of this narrative into the keynote the next morning. And I also put it on LinkedIn that next day and just sort of shared some of these stats. And I thought it was interesting. You know, there was a lot of engagement with that post. There was some condescending or like disagreeing on the level of whether these numbers would be achieved, you know, being called BS in one case. I don't disagree that these numbers may be way off. I mean, generally speaking, that happens all the time when we're trying to predict the future. Because if we actually knew these numbers, then, you know, then we wouldn't probably be working for a living. We would just be,
Right.
you know, making bets on other stuff. But I think it's representative of some really important trends. And the key is they're going to be big. So whether the outbound messaging is 15% or 60%, it's going to be significant. In other words, there are way too many marketers and brands not even paying attention yet. Don't even know what generative AI is. There's a good chance if you're listening to this, you don't know what the term generative AI actually means. And what they're saying is it's going to be a very significant part of your life within the next 2 to 3 years. And so when I look at stuff like this, I don't necessarily put a ton of weight on are they going to be accurate in the total amount or value. What I look at is think, damn, I hadn't even thought about digital twins. Like, so I look at this trend and think, you and I talk about this stuff all the time. We write about it. I mean, we had a whole chapter on sales in our book. We didn't talk about digital twins in that chapter. It hadn't even been on my radar.
Mm.
And so that was one of the ones where I stopped and thought, man, like this is really interesting stuff. And again, I didn't get caught up in the numbers, but the digital twin thing alone is so intriguing. And it made me want to go research the vendors that are doing this, like who's building these digital twins, because the concept is so smart. Like if you can take your customer profile data, everything they've ever done before, we know we can build lookalike audiences for ad targeting, but what if we can actually generate a synthetic version of that customer and then run our ads and social shares and emails against that database?
Hmm.
So rather than having to send A/B tests and things like that, you just basically replicate your database and you create computer models of the customer and then you see how they interact with things. Like it's so smart. And that they're saying it's big, going to be big enough by 2030, which tells me, like they said, it's 9 billion in 2022, up to 150 billion by 2030. That means somebody's doing this right now. Like
Hmm.
who's doing the digital twin stuff? Because I want to know. I want to read those case studies. I want to evaluate that tech. So that was one of the things that jumped out to me. The other is emotion AI, I find intriguing. So the stat you
Hmm.
mentioned was AI identification of emotions influence roughly half of online ads. But I've talked to 2 vendors in the last 7 days doing emotion AI.
Hmm.
And it's like, either whether it's in research or predicting ad performance. And basic premise is they can use computer vision in one of the cases to read your emotions. And while you may answer a survey in one way, your face may tell a different story. And so they're trying to use these computer models to train on people's emotions. And then the computer can actually, predict what your emotion or reaction is to something. So I think multimodality is another one. Like Google talks about that all the time.
Yeah.
So these themes, these 7 trends, I think don't get caught up in the numbers. Focus on the fact that these are really big things. And again, like we know some major software companies that aren't doing this stuff. And so the other takeaway I had was there's not enough urgency from marketers to figure this stuff out, and not enough urgency from a lot of the vendors we talk about to be working on this stuff. Like if you're a
Mhm.
CRM platform, I don't want to call any out, but like if you're a CRM platform and you're not like thinking about this in your product roadmap, there's some problems ahead. Like this stuff's real tech that needs to be infused into the core tech solutions that we use as marketers.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a really good point about the stats themselves. It's like you want to focus on the size and the directionality of the trend, right? And there's no question these are huge trends that are accelerating. So, yeah, whether the number ends up being right or not, and honestly, I mean, looking at things like a digital twin, you're right. I don't see many marketers and salespeople at all taking it seriously. And I think that's the takeaway is like, who cares about what the numbers end up being? This is here. It's now. It is happening.